When my mother died, my relatives promised they'd take care of me. Instead, they locked me out of her house the same night she was buried. I slept on the porch in the rain while they divided her jewelry inside. They thought I was powerless, but Mom left me something they never expected, her final weapon against them. My name is Ava Montgomery, though my mother always called me Little Bird. To everyone else, I was just Ava, quiet, polite, the girl who kept her head down. But to her, I was something fragile yet strong, someone she believed would one day spread her wings. That night, shivering on the porch she once tucked me into, I wondered if she had been wrong. The funeral had been only hours before. I can still feel the damp chill in the air as the last handful of soil hit her coffin. My relatives' faces blurred through my tears, and yet their words rang clearly. "Don't worry, Ava. We'll look after you." My uncle even squeezed my shoulder, his palm heavy like false comfort. My aunt dabbed her eyes dramatically, though not a single tear stained her cheeks. We drove back to my mother's house in a slow convoy of black cars. That home wasn't just wood and brick to me. Every corner carried her laughter, her scent, her love. I thought we'd spend the evening together, sharing stories, honoring her. Instead, the tone shifted the moment we stepped inside. My cousins began whispering in the kitchen. My aunt darted to the jewelry box like it was her duty, and my uncle pulled out a notebook, listing who gets what. I stood frozen in the living room, clutching the only thing I had managed to keep close, my mother's shawl. The scent of her lavender perfume lingered faintly in its threads. I wanted to speak up, to tell them to stop, but my voice died in my throat. "Go rest, Ava," my aunt said without looking at me, her hands already closing around Mom's pearl necklace. "We'll take care of everything tonight." Her words twisted like a knife. Rest? How could I, when they were pillaging her memory before her body was even cold? I moved toward the hallway leading to my bedroom, but my cousin blocked me. "Sorry," he said, not sorry at all. "We're locking up the house tonight. Too many people know she's gone. Don't want thieves breaking in." I blinked at him. "But I live here." He shrugged. "Not anymore." That was it. No kindness, no hesitation. My uncle jingled the new keys in his hand and said firmly, "It's for your own safety, Ava. You'll be fine." Then the door shut in my face. I stood outside, the drizzle already thickening to rain. My knuckles stung from banging on the door, begging to be let in. Through the windows, I saw silhouettes moving. My aunt's arms waving as she claimed earrings, my cousins arguing over silverware, my uncle sipping whiskey like it was just another business deal. Their laughter carried through the walls, sharp and cruel against the storm. So I sat. I pulled Mom's shawl tight around my shoulders and curled up on the porch steps, the wood slick beneath me. The rain plastered my hair to my face, the cold burrowed into my bones. Every gust of wind carried her voice in my head. "Little bird, don't be afraid." But that night, I was. I thought about all the nights she had stayed up when I was sick, whispering lullabies until I fell asleep. I thought about the mornings she kissed my forehead before school, her hands always smelling faintly of coffee and soap. And now she was gone, and the people who shared her blood had turned into vultures. By midnight, my body was trembling. My teeth chattered so hard I bit my tongue. Still, no one opened the door, not even to hand me a blanket. At one point, I saw my aunt draw the curtains tight, cutting me off from the last flicker of light. They wanted me gone. I don't know how I managed to sleep, but exhaustion pulled me under. I dreamed of her, standing in the kitchen, humming softly, placing a steaming cup of cocoa in my hands. But when I reached out, she dissolved into the storm. Morning came gray and bitter. My clothes clung damp to my skin as I pushed myself upright. My fingers were numb, my stomach hollow. I tried the door again, but the locks had been changed. A stranger's metal, cold and final. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of boxes already packed, my mother's dresses, her framed photos, even the quilt my grandmother had made. They weren't protecting her things, they were erasing her. I begged at the door, voice raw. "Please, just let me keep her ring, please." My aunt's face appeared for a brief second. Her expression was hard, her lipstick smudged from a long night of drinking. She opened the door just enough to slap my hand away as I reached for the knob. "You're just a girl," she hissed. "You'll survive." Then the door slammed shut again. Something broke inside me that morning. Not just grief, but the fragile belief that family meant protection. I stood there, soaked, humiliated, watching the house I grew up in become a stranger's fortress. By noon, I had no choice but to leave. A friend, kind, patient, let me crash on her couch. She made me tea, pressed dry clothes into my hands, and told me I could stay as long as I needed. I nodded, but inside, shame burned. I had gone from a daughter with a home to a beggar in a single night. For days, I moved through fog. I couldn't eat much. I barely slept. I felt like my mother had died twice, once in the hospital, and again in the theft of her memory. But then, one evening, while rummaging through the single bag I had managed to grab before the funeral, I found something strange. Tucked deep between folded clothes was a sealed envelope. On the front, in her familiar looping script, were the words, "For Ava, when they show their true faces." My breath caught. My hands trembled as I traced the ink. I pressed the envelope to my chest, hot tears blurring my vision. She had known. She had known. Inside was a letter that would change everything. The morning after I was locked out, soaked and shivering on the porch, I refused to move. I clutched Mom's shawl, letting the rain pour down my back, and wondered if I had any fight left in me. My relatives had taken everything, or so they thought. They didn't see the envelope tucked into my coat pocket, the one Mom had slipped there when she'd kissed my forehead that morning. For Ava, when they show their true faces. The brass key inside the envelope felt heavy and meaningful in my hand. I stared at it as if it were a talisman, knowing it could change everything. The letter inside told me about Deposit Box 117 at the Bank of Crestwood and contained a detailed note. Your inheritance is not just possessions. It is power, little bird. Use it wisely. That afternoon, I wrapped the shawl tighter and walked to the bank, keeping my head low. The city was gray, clouds hanging like a shroud, but inside the lobby, sunlight glinted off the polished counters. I approached the teller with trembling hands, and when I produced the key, the vault door felt like a gateway into a new life. Inside, the deposit box held exactly what Mom had promised: the deed to the house, full bank account records, jewelry inventory, and a leather-bound notebook, frayed at the edges but meticulously organized. The notebook was my mother's masterpiece: dates, receipts, names, transactions. Every deceit my relatives had committed over the years was recorded in painstaking detail. I could see how much effort she had put into documenting their lies. It wasn't just evidence, it was a map of betrayal and greed, and now it was mine to wield. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, spreading the notebook across the surface. My relatives' faces from the night of the funeral flashed through my mind: the smirks, the whispered plans, the way they had thought me powerless. My hands shook as I traced the handwriting. Never let them forget, little bird. Truth is stronger than loud mouths. I started my plan slowly, deliberately. First, I cataloged everything: each piece of jewelry, each document, each transaction. Then I created copies, secure backups in a small locked drawer beneath the floorboard. I wasn't ready to confront them yet. I needed leverage, and leverage required patience. Over the next few days, I observed them from a distance. My aunt wore her borrowed pearl earrings proudly at a church event. My cousin posted a video of himself flaunting gold bracelets that were not legally his. Every move was a mistake, and I documented them meticulously. The notebook guided me like a blueprint for justice. I started strategically leaking information: a scanned receipt here, a record of a fraudulent transaction there. I made sure it reached people who could hold them accountable: a church trustee, a partner at a construction firm, a close friend who had previously trusted them. The results were almost immediate. Phone calls were returned in anger. Emails demanded explanations. Reputation, their one shield, started to crack. Even more empowering was how the notebook taught me about timing. Mom had left notes for me about patience, about striking when the moment was right. I observed them carefully: arguments, late-night conversations, moments of arrogance. Every slip they made, every lie they told, became ammunition for the eventual confrontation. In the evenings, I let myself breathe. I moved through Mom's home like a quiet storm, restoring things she had once cherished. The kitchen smelled faintly of her favorite spices. The living room held her old photographs, and the air seemed to hum with her presence. I could almost hear her whisper, "Little bird, don't rush. Watch, wait, and when the time comes, strike." I practiced my resolve every day. I walked past them in town, keeping my head high as they threw side glances, unaware that the quiet girl they had dismissed was slowly becoming a storm. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to fight physically. Mom had shown me that truth, wielded correctly, was a weapon sharper than any anger. One night, I went through the notebook again and paused on a particular set of entries. My aunt had borrowed a necklace under the guise of returning it after inspection. My cousin had transferred a sum of money from a shared account without consent. My uncle had claimed ownership of items that were clearly mom's personal property. Each act was documented with date, time, and supporting evidence. I could see how everything connected. The following week, I decided it was time to escalate. I sent an anonymous tip with scanned copies of the transactions to the local authorities. Another tip reached the family lawyer my uncle often consulted, and I posted a subtle, factual note to the neighborhood association, highlighting items that had been misappropriated. I did all of this quietly, without fanfare, letting the evidence speak for itself. The reactions were intoxicating. Calls, emails, and quiet confrontations began. My relatives didn't know how to respond. Their usual tactics of intimidation and charm failed. They had underestimated me. They had thought the porch, the rain, and my silence were all they needed to dominate me. They didn't realize that the quiet girl in the corner, the one clutching a shawl, had the ultimate weapon, the truth, packaged carefully by the woman who had loved her most. At night, I would sit in mom's armchair, the notebook open, cross-referencing transactions and planning next moves. I felt a thrill I hadn't known in my grief, power balanced by justice. Each step I took wasn't just about reclaiming stolen wealth, it was about reclaiming dignity, rewriting the narrative, and honoring mom's final instructions. I had become a force my relatives couldn't predict. And though I knew confrontation would eventually come, I was ready. I had learned patience, observation, and the art of timing. Mom had trusted me to carry her final weapon, and I would not fail. Every morning, I reminded myself of her words. Little bird, your wings are stronger than their claws. And I believed them, more fiercely with each passing day. The storm was coming, and I was no longer hiding on the porch. I was ready to reclaim everything. The day of the will reading arrived like a storm gathering on the horizon. My relatives entered the lawyer's office wearing their masks of grief and confidence, each convinced they still held the upper hand. I walked in quietly, clutching mom's shawl in my bag and the notebook tucked safely beneath my arm. I had spent weeks preparing, watching, documenting, and planning. Now it was time. Mr. Thompson, the lawyer, began with the formalities, reading minor gifts and charitable donations first, letting tension grow like a tightening coil. My aunt's eyes flickered at every line. My uncle's jaw tightened with impatience. My cousins leaned forward, whispering quietly, certain of what they expected, that I would be weak, overwhelmed, powerless. Then he paused, adjusting his glasses, and said the words I had been waiting for. And to my daughter, Ava Montgomery, I leave my house, my savings, the jewelry collection, and all other possessions in full. For a moment, the room froze. Then chaos erupted. My aunt gasped, clutching her pearls as if they could shield her from reality. My uncle slammed a hand on the table, yelling, "This is impossible! She cannot possibly—" I stayed calm. I let their panic rise, letting them believe my shock mirrored theirs. But the truth was, I had expected this moment. Mom had prepared me. The notebook was next. Mr. Thompson opened the leather-bound book and began reading selectively. Dates, receipts, transactions, and evidence of theft and deceit. My aunt's borrowed necklace, documented. My cousin's misappropriated funds, evident in a ledger with stamped bank confirmations. My uncle's false claims on property, annotated with emails and signatures. Every act of greed, every lie, every betrayal had been meticulously recorded. The air in the room grew thick. Voices that had once commanded attention now faltered, unsure how to respond. This can't be right," my aunt whispered, trembling. My uncle's face turned red with fury, yet he could not argue with the evidence laid bare before everyone. I stood, feeling the swell of power that comes from truth, not malice. "It is right," I said softly, letting the weight of my voice carry through the room. "Everything here is accounted for. Everything you took or tried to claim is documented. Mom left this for me, and for the record of your actions." My cousins tried to interject, fumbling for excuses, but Mr. Thompson held up a hand. "The documents are legally verified. All evidence has been confirmed. Any further challenge will require proof, not protest." I smiled faintly, tasting the satisfaction of seeing their arrogance crumble. This was only the beginning. Weeks of strategic leaks had primed the people around them. Bank officers questioned transactions, partners and neighbors started asking uncomfortable questions, and the local church had begun quietly investigating missing donations. I had orchestrated it carefully. Every move, every leak, every subtle hint had been calculated. My relatives were about to feel the full force of consequences without me ever needing to raise my voice. The notebook, Mom's meticulous preparation, had become the ultimate weapon. Over the following days, the consequences unfolded like clockwork. My aunt's borrowed jewelry was quietly reclaimed through legal notices. My cousin's fraudulent transfers were frozen, and investigations were opened by authorities. My uncle's false claims on property were contested by neighbors and verified witnesses. Each act of exposure was precise, leaving them stunned, humiliated, and unable to respond without revealing further guilt. The final confrontation came when I sent a copy of the most damning documents to the local newspaper, anonymously, of course. Headlines appeared the next morning, detailing discrepancies in accounts, theft of assets, and evidence of deception. My relatives scrambled, attempting damage control, but the truth is never easy to fight. They were unmasked publicly, their arrogance laid bare for all to see. Through it all, I stayed centered. I wasn't acting out of anger, I was acting in justice, in honor of Mom's foresight and love. I watched as their world fractured. The power they had wielded over me and over others evaporated in the light of truth. My mother's final weapon had been a combination of evidence and timing, and it worked flawlessly. One afternoon, I returned to the porch where I had once slept in the rain. The boards felt solid beneath my hands. I remembered that night vividly, shivering, alone, abandoned by the people who should have cared. And now the same people were facing consequences they could not escape. I felt a quiet satisfaction, tempered by the sadness of betrayal. This was not vengeance for its own sake. It was justice delivered with precision. I walked through the house, room by room, restoring it to the way Mom had loved it. The kitchen smelled faintly of her favorite spices. The living room held photographs that captured moments she cherished. I set the jewelry back into its rightful boxes, now secure under my name. The house was no longer a battlefield. It was a home reclaimed. Even at night, I reviewed the notebook, reliving Mom's wisdom and strategy. I realized that her lesson had been far deeper than possessions or revenge. She had shown me how to wield patience, observation, and cunning. She had taught me to turn betrayal into strength and grief into power. She had ensured that I could face the world, fully equipped, fully armed. When my relatives finally confronted me, desperate and cornered, I met them calmly. Their faces were masks of rage, embarrassment, and disbelief. "Ava," my aunt spat, "this isn't fair." "It is," I replied evenly, holding the notebook like a shield. "This is exactly what fairness looks like. Mom prepared me for this. And now, you see why underestimating me was your biggest mistake." They had no answer. Their power had been an illusion, and I had shattered it with nothing more than evidence, patience, and strategy. The humiliation was complete, public, and unavoidable. Weeks later, I stood on the porch in the morning sun, the wind catching my hair. The rain of that first night had long since passed. The house was mine, the belongings were mine, and the justice had been served. I lifted Mom's wedding ring and slid it on my finger. It fit perfectly, like a promise. I whispered to the empty porch, "Little bird, fly." And I did. I spread my wings, not in malice, not in anger, but in triumph. My mother's weapon had worked, my mother's legacy lived on, and I, her daughter, her little bird, was finally free.